Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today we're going to be diving into PSP's MasterComp, and we're going to be looking specifically at what the ratio control does. Now this ratio is a little bit special because you can have ratios of say 2 to 1 or infinity to 1 or 4 to 1. These are kind of standard ratios. But then you can also have ratios like 0.5 to 1. So this is a ratio less than 1 to 1. And this actually correlates to upwards expansion. And then you have this upwards button. And so if you now have a ratio of 2.8 to 1, this is going to do upwards compression. And if you have a ratio less than 1 to 1, like 0.5 to 1, it's now going to do downwards expansion. So we're going to be looking at that, what that means. I have an example here, a demo ready to roll that's going to really lay it out visually, and you can also hear it and things. So if you already know what upwards and downwards compression and expansion are, then this may not be the video for you. But if you're new to these topics, this is it. So let's go. So the first thing you need to understand is when you have volume, and we have a volume level called a threshold, there is two regions. And it seems obvious, but it's really important you understand this idea that let's say that we've got a volume level come in and it is really loud. We might have a threshold where we say, oh, if you go past -6 dBFS, then you're too loud and we're going to turn you down. And that would be looking at stuff above the threshold. But we could also say if we have a sound come in and it doesn't go past -6 dBFS, if it's below, let's say it's at -12 dBFS, then we might turn it up. And so there's this notion of, we could do stuff with things below the threshold or things above the threshold. And this leads to these different ideas of upwards and downwards things. Downwards things are things that get pulled down. They get made softer. Upwards things are things that get pulled up. They get turned up. They get made louder. Okay, so that's where all these different names come from. Then you have the notion of compression and expansion. So compression is when you decrease the dynamic range of a sound. So if a sound has things that are really soft and really loud, that's considered to have a lot of dynamics. There's soft things and loud things. The range is big. And when you compress it, you make them more similar. And there's two ways you could do that. You could turn the soft stuff up to be as loud as the loud stuff, or you could take the loud stuff and turn it down to be as soft as the soft stuff. Either way, you got to level the playing field somehow. And the notion of expansion, you are increasing the dynamic range. So if it's, if it's louder on one end and softer on the other, you make it even louder or you make it even softer. And that's the general notion behind compression and expansion. And the idea when we say upwards or downwards, we're talking about specifically, we're going to compress. Downwards compression means we're going to turn stuff down to be softer. So everything's just soft now. Or if we do upwards compression, we're going to pull soft stuff up to be as loud as loud stuff. And that's in both ways, we reduce the range of, everything's just always loud or it's always soft. So there's very little dynamics now. It's very much the same. If we do expansion, if we do upwards expansion, we take loud stuff and make it even louder. And so now it's even further away from the soft stuff. And if we do downwards expansion, we take soft stuff and we make it even softer. And this is where the family of gating plugins comes from. They're basically just downward expanders. Okay, so that's expansion, compression, downwards, all these different terms. Let's look at it in action. We just need to understand these things. And now we know that there's this threshold we got to set. So I have here a threshold. I'm going to go ahead and just set it right here around -12. Let's turn off the plugin for a second and just look at our input. It's 4 sine waves. It's a loud sine wave and then a soft, and then a loud one. And it's just on a loop. So you can see the soft ones are really far away. So if we get these to sound equally loud, like that's a pretty big change to the dynamics. Right now, it's a very dynamic signal. So let's go ahead and set this 1 to 1. Let's also turn off upwards. So we're starting here. So, okay, this is kind of like the default setup. We're at -12 on our threshold. So that's going to be softer. It's going to be somewhere below. So our loud signal definitely goes past this threshold. We can also look at our meters, but this is where the 0 and the 0 can become confusing. And for now, we're just going to ignore that. Just trust that this will definitely affect the signal. So if we hit play, comes in, 1 to 1 means we don't do anything, right? If it comes in, it goes out 1 to 1. If we have 2 to 1, what this says, let's say that it goes 2 dB past our threshold. Well, then it's only going to be allowed to go past 1 dB. It's like we've hired a little guy to sit and control the volume and watch the volume levels really closely. And if it goes past that level, he's going to turn it down and he'll only let 1 dB get through. He'll let some sound go past the threshold, specifically 2 to 1. And so we'll begin to see it get crushed. So this is the new one. This was it before. So this is 2 to 1 of whatever our threshold, minus 12 in this case. If we set it 8 to 1, it'll be even more aggressive. You can see it shrinks further. How quickly this volume change occurs, like how quickly do we turn it down and turn it back up? That's the attack and the release. So 8 to 1, pretty dang aggressive, right? We can see it grabbing it and turning it down. We can also see these little lips here. This is because our attack isn't very fast. So it lets some of the sound get through before we can turn it down. So if we increase this speed, we can get a flatter sound. Now this would get rid of transients, which would be a bad thing in some cases. If we take our release and make it really long, now it takes a long time once we've gone through to turn it back up. And look at this. These sections are now being squished. See how they're bigger over here? Now the soft stuff, even though it's below the threshold, it should not be affected. It is affected because we take a really long time to turn it up. So once it's gone down, it's pretty much permanently crushed. So you want to, have usually a reasonably quick release. You usually don't want a super long release, and it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing mastering, you're going to do this process very differently than if you're doing bus compression or on the nature of your sound. Like you're doing drums, those are very transient sounds, so you may deal with the attack and the release very differently. Some people like to split into 2 compressor jobs, one that focuses on transients, one that focuses on the sustain portion of the drums. There's just all these thoughts and processes, but all you need to understand is that is downwards compression. We are taking the loud stuff and we are making it closer to the soft stuff. And then if we were to apply makeup gain and bring this up, now the whole thing is on average louder. Now let's go for the opposite direction. So hopefully you understand that's downwards compression. It takes stuff that's below, that goes past the threshold, above the threshold, and turns it down. Now we're still looking at audio above the threshold, but if we go in the opposite direction, like 0.5 to 1, before it would turn down audio that went past the threshold. Now this is upwards expansion. So it will turn audio up that goes past the threshold. So if we set it to 0.5 to 1, we'll see that loud audio gets even louder. And this is what it sounds like. It flies off the chart. So that's the difference there. So see, if you understand the terms and you understand these ideas, actually not that hard to understand. So audio that is above this threshold is just getting yanked up. And I should turn down my makeup gain here. My makeup gain's turned way up. Let's turn that down. And we can still see it flies off the charts. It is so high. So that is an upwards expander. And if you have drums or something and they're kind of dull, you could, some people would say like revitalize the transients or enhance the transients by making the transients even louder than they originally were. Again, though, this is subject to however fast this attack and release can be. And if you can't get a fast enough attack with some sounds, you may get this like secondary volume phase, which could lead to some interesting sounds. But that's upwards expansion and downwards compression. Let's go back to a ratio of 1 to 1 and hit upwards. So what upwards does, right, is it's going to, in the case of upwards compression, so now we're looking at stuff below the threshold, and we're going to do stuff with that. In upwards compression, we are going to pull that audio up. So if it is below our threshold, it will get pulled up. So if we play this, and then we know we set our threshold. I mean, this is fine where it is right now. And then we begin to bring up this audio. It'll start pulling up this soft stuff. And there you go. So it's been brought up. Infinity to 1, if we lower this ratio further, we can bring it up more. Now, this comes with some consequences, but let me show you. As we bring this down further, that means it's got to be, or not down, as we bring it up. Because as we bring it down, it's closer to where that threshold is, so it won't be brought up as much. So a low threshold here will actually do less. Right, because it's closer to the threshold. It's not as far away from it, so it doesn't get pulled up as much, even though we have an extremely high ratio. If we bring this back, now it's really yanking it up. And that yanking up is because it's really far away from the threshold, so it pulls it up. Typically, you don't see people use upwards compression because if you have noise in a recording, you don't want to yank up the noise when unnecessary. So it typically is more convenient to compress everything and then turn it up with a makeup gain at the end, because the noise floor will be disproportionately affected with upwards compression. And in a later video, we might explore that, but if you just slap down some drums and put it on there, it usually becomes pretty apparent pretty quick. And sometimes this can be cool, but you want to be careful. You could be a little more aggressive, or a lot more aggressive, in my opinion, with downwards compression and get away with a little bit more. But some people are purists and they want to leave their transients alone. And this is one way of sort of trying to dodge the transient problem. You still have to do stuff with attack and release. It's not like it completely disappears as a problem, but it greatly relieves the loud transients, which are typically the things you're trying to save anyways. So if you're really paranoid, you could just splice out your transients and then just completely process them separately. But that is upwards compression. If we go down now to 0.5 to 1, this is going to do downwards expansion. So it's an expander because it's less than 1 to 1. So it's going to make the dynamic range bigger, and it's going to push the soft stuff to be even softer. So if I play this audio is very far away from our threshold. So it's way down there. And we have a ratio of 0.5 to 1. So it's not as aggressive. We actually can't turn it down as much, only at a ratio of half. So it'll still be there, but it'll be turned down. So we'll go ahead, we'll turn upwards back on. This is why it can be really confusing, because it's upwards, but it's a downwards expander. So it's a little bit of a mind bend there. But we'll turn it on, and this is what it sounds like. You can see it's been squished. Now, it's not completely gone because we are only given the axis 0.5 to 1. If we were given a further control, we could turn this into a gate effectively. And as we bring it in, this will have less of an effect because it is now closer. And just to show you, before, this was our original level, and then after, these are our levels. So that is the ratio control. If you found this helpful, I'd love to know. These are topics that I think can be extremely confusing. So hopefully this explanation and demo laid it out for you. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day. Drop